don't get crowds this loud, but this large. But what Congressman has said to me is that we need to make sure we have these every city, every group, so people will understand just how important this election is. There's something that would adversely affect everybody if we do not elect Kamala Harris. Now, with that said, I just want you all to know that Project 2025 is a comprehensive agenda proposed by a conservative think tank and given groups that aim to implement a range of conservative policies should Republicans win 2024 election. And we're not going to let that happen, are we?
No.
I want to first thank Bishop Jerome Williams. I see Bishop. Can you just wave your hand and so we can all thank you for hosting us this afternoon? We really appreciate it. And he told me he was busy, so he just wanted to take his seat. This is an outgrowth of Congressman Scott asked me if you were going to give a welcome. He said you, okay, thank you. Well, I just want you to know that this is an outgrowth of a forum that was held over in Hampton a couple of weeks ago. And we were just brainstorming, and one of the panelists said that we ought to each take a particular topic and make sure that we share that with the voters so they will understand just how serious this is. And I just made a statement kind of flippant like I normally do. There's something to despise, everything to despise about Project 2025. And Vernon Tillage grabbed that and ran with it. And I told him, I said, you ought to let the Portsmouth Democratic Committee host a forum. And he said, Senator, I think you ought to host a forum. And that's so here we are. And with that, I want to start by introducing Vernon, who will come up and introduce some people, and start off with Dr. Clavell.
All right, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
First of all, I just want to say it is a pleasure to see so many people out here getting engaged in this election. And it just goes to show the urgency of the time in which we're living in today. And so I just want to, first of all, give you all a round of applause, please. As Senator Lucas May mentioned, this is a conversation that needs to be happening all across, not only Portsmouth, but all across the Commonwealth of Virginia and all across the nation. So hopefully with the information that you all get today, you all will share with your friends, with your families, and even with your enemies to let them know that there is everything to despise about Project 2025 and that this election is very consequential. Now, we say every election is, but this one right here really is. This is literally about democracy being on the line and everything that we know about America as it is being on the line. So before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge a few people that are in attendance with us today that are not on the panel. We have our Portsmouth Sheriff, Sheriff Michael Moore. If you please stand up. We also have our Portsmouth Clerk of Court, Cynthia Morrison. We have Reverend Kelvin Turner from Zion Baptist Church. Of course, we already acknowledged Bishop Jerome Williams, the leader of this house. We also have Councilwoman from the city of Chesapeake, Dr. Ella Ward, as well as the city councilman from the city of Chesapeake, Don Carey. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Eric Clavell, who is very instrumental in politics in the Hampton Roads region, as well as he leads radio commentary for Norfolk State University. In addition, serving as the special assistant to the president of Norfolk State University for Government Relations, Dr. Eric Clavell.
All right, good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
Again, I'd like to also say thank you so much for coming out. And just to see as many people that are here really speaks to the importance of this issue, but it also speaks to how important you believe it is for to be active in your community. Because one thing about politics and policy, it doesn't work without the people. This is your government. This is your representative. This is your country. It's a great country. It is built by us and continue to grow with us, and it only gets better as long as we get better and we have good policy and good policymakers and good people in place to ensure just that. So, listen, we're going to get right into it. But before I do, I want to give a few introductions to individuals that are on the panel. Now, of course, these are familiar faces to everyone. And what we're going to do, I'm not going to go all into their bios, because if you do that, Bishop will be here all night. But what I will do is just simply give their titles and what they're doing, and then I'll ask them to give greetings, the first question, and we'll go from there. Yes. Let's see, we also have another special guest who walked in, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke. There she is. She's right. Good to see you. All right, so to my very far right, your left, we have my good friend, James Boyd, who's the president of the Portsmouth branch of the NAACP. Next to him, we have my sister, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, who's a historian at Norfolk State University and is probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. So. Next to her, we have none other than who I believe is the smartest congressman on the Hill. Not because he's just our congressman and mine, but because he is. He actually reads the bills. Congressman Bobby Scott. Now look, this lady needs no introduction because she leads by example and her boots. Just ask the governor. But we have none other than the only one, Senator L. Louise Lucas. Next to her, we have my guy who has done so much in a short time, but still rising star in the party and also in politics. That's Delegate Cliff Hayes. And finally, we have with us Dr. Michael Clemens, who is a professor and director for the Institute for Study of Race and Ethnicity at ODU. All right, listen, so let's get right into it. But before we do, I want to give a quick summary about why we're here, just an overview. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Project 2025? Oh, quite a few. All right, now, this is a 900-page document. Just by a show of hands, how many have read that 900-page document? Okay, we got a couple in the back.
Here it is, right here.
It is right there, right there. Now, this particular document here is what they're calling a complete overhaul of federal government. This is the playbook, day one, in the event that Donald Trump wins the election. This is what is going to be implemented in the first 180 days. Now, with that, Project 2025 asserts that the entire executive branch is under the direct control of the president, under what's called a not unproven unitary executive theory. But it proposes to reclassify tens of thousands of federal civil service workers as political appointees in order to replace them with people loyal to the president. Okay? It's in plain sight. We're not hiding this, we're not making this up. As a matter of fact, I want everyone, for those of you who have heard of it and have not, I want you to go to your phones, and I want you to pull up a window, and I want you simply to type in project2025.org. 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 You should get a screen that looks like this. And that is the website for this document. And then I want you to go to another screen, and you could actually go to Google and put in Agenda 47, or you could type in DonaldJTrump.com. DonaldJTrump.com. And this is a, some of you may have never gone there before, but we're going to take you places where you've never gone tonight. All right? So with that, Agenda 47 is simply a 20 bullet point proposal or breakdown of Project 2025. That's really what it is. Agenda 47 is the agenda for the president, former president, in the event that he is elected president. Okay? So when we talk about Project 2025 and Agenda 47, they're going to be used interchangeably because they're the exact same thing. All right. So with that, we're going to go right into our panel discussions because I know we have a lot of questions about this. But with this particular document will impact all areas of federal government and all areas of our policies impacting our lives, from civil rights, healthcare, education, environment, criminal justice, and the like, and also voting. And the list goes on and on and on. There are a lot of things that are in these documents that you would think would never, ever be thought of or could happen. But how many thought J6 couldn't happen, but it actually did? So with that being the case, with civil rights, the impacts, it looks to weaken affirmative action, anti-discrimination laws, and reduce enforcement of the EEOC. Congressman Scott, what happens to efforts to improve equity in employment if Project 2025 aims are actually achieved?
Thank you, Eric. I think you got to put this all in perspective as you have. And part of it comes from the fact that 8 years ago, when then President-elect Trump came into office, he wasn't ready. He didn't expect to get elected. Nobody else expected him to get elected. So when he got sworn in, he wasn't ready to govern. By the time they got organized, 2 years had gone by, and then Nancy Pelosi took over the House, and he couldn't get anything done. So they're not going to make that mistake again. They're going to be ready on day one. And they got a two-part strategy. One is to consolidate power, and two, to strip benefits from people. And consolidate power, he's already told the people that he's going to be dictator on day one. Nobody in history has ever been dictator on day one, not dictator on day two or three. And so he's going to consolidate power. The Supreme Court has helped him out by giving him immunity. He's going to consolidate power with the Supreme Court. All these agencies do regulations. The Supreme Court that he now controls will have much more strength over them based on the Chevron decision. They'll be able to overturn a lot of regulations that they're going to do. So then the next step is to strip benefits. And the civil rights, one of the first things in civil rights is Title VI, which uses disparate impact treatment to see where discrimination is going on. If you have a policy that adversely affects one group worse than others, you have a disparate impact. And under Title VI, you can get relief. What they want to do, and this is a major part of the civil rights portion of their legislation, what they want to do is get rid of disparate impact cases. So that even though a policy has a disparate discriminatory impact, unless you can prove in that case that there's intentional discrimination going on, you just have to just sit up and take it. That's one of the major civil rights protections that will be gone. They want to get rid of any mention of DEI. Who's against equity? But when you include everybody, they get offended. So they want to get rid of all DEI references throughout the code, and they want to specifically allow LGBTQ discrimination about anywhere, particularly in education. They want to allow that. So in a lot of areas, they're going to just scale back and turn the clock back on civil rights. Now, turning the clock back as one of their goals should not be a surprise because they've been campaigning on it. Make America great again. Like when? You know they want to go back past the 70s because they got rid of Roe v. Wade. You want to know that they don't like the Voting Rights Act, so it's past the 60s. Trump appointed many judges that would not say whether or not Brown v. Board of Education was properly decided. So he wanted it before 1954. And when you appoint judges that don't know whether segregated schools is a good idea or not, you can imagine what their rulings are going to be on civil rights. So the civil rights agenda is very much in jeopardy. And so we need to make sure that we use the one weapon we have to make sure it doesn't take place. And that is to make sure he doesn't get elected.
Brother Boyd, you over there. You know, you lead the largest civil rights organization here in Portsmouth, and the oldest branch of it here. Civil rights, what do you think will happen? What is in jeopardy?
Well, first of all, Eric, thank you for the question, and I want to thank everybody for coming here today, and thank those members that are in the audience of the NAACP. As Congressman Scott said, Project 2025 is a threat to civil rights, but it's a threat in so many ways, and one of the things that it really caught my attention, certainly there's a lot of items we're going to talk about, but one of the biggest item that's in Project 2025 is immunity for police officers. And we all saw recently what happened with our sister, Sonia Massey, where that murderer murdered her in her home. Unarmed, no weapon, and he murdered her in her home. Can you imagine if Project 2025 was in place and they got immunity? Immunity. I mean, I can bring it right home to Portsmouth. 2015, William Chapman was shot at the Walmart. Can you imagine if Stephen Rankin had immunity? This is one of the biggest threats to civil rights that we know. Somebody that's been in the game and in the streets and trying to advocate with our police department, let me say too that we have a great police chief. We're working with him on policies inside the police department. One of the other things that Project 2025 does is it really supports and undergirds the police union. The police union is one of the biggest threats to civil rights that we know. And the reason why is because if you notice, even with Sonia Massey case, they were advocating that he be relieved of any charges and any wrongdoing. So Eric, to answer your question, one of the biggest things, obviously we're going to get into more items as we go, but one of the biggest things that really got my attention in terms of Project 2025 and why it's a serious threat is because it would give immunity to individuals who break the law behind the badge. And we know what that has done to our community and what that has done to our people throughout generations. So as Congressman Scott said, there's so many other things, but definitely in terms of law enforcement, it will set us back and take us back to a time in which it cascades us and allows free murder to happen in our community.
As President Boyd said, we have a lot of areas we want to get to, but before we do that, this is so important, this first topic. I want to see if anybody else had to say one or anything else on civil rights before we get to health care.
Thank you, Dr. Covell. I certainly will, because James is the younger version of L. Louise Lucas back in 1980 when I was president of the Portsmouth branch of the NAACP. I was the first woman to be president of the NAACP, so I probably know more about civil rights than I do about most anything else. But regarding the Civil Rights Act, for instance, the project could promote policies that prioritize religious freedoms and states' rights, which might conflict with federal civil rights protections. Additionally, they could introduce efforts that will reduce the federal government's role in enforcing anti-discrimination law, leaving more powers to states, which could lead to a patchwork of civil rights enforcement across the nation. The full extent of the impact would depend on the specific policies implemented and how they are interpreted by other courts. Now, affirmative action in particular, the project would advocate for the elimination or reduction of affirmative action programs which are designed to address historical inequities and ensure equal opportunities in education, employment, and contracting. Also, with Voting Rights Act, the Project 2025 would lead to a rollback of protections established under the Voting Rights Act. which is closely tied to the Civil Rights Act. And these conservatives would also want us to go back to stricter voter ID laws, reducing federal oversight of state voting practices, and other measures that could disproportionately affect minority voters. This could result in decreased voter participation among historically marginalized groups. And that's not all, because if you would go through these 920 pages with these 30 different chapters, you will find that there's something in there that would affect you from the cradle to the grave. So if anybody says that Project 2025 doesn't affect them, they need to do what I haven't done yet, which is read whole 920 pages. It's hard reading. It really is hard reading. But this is what you need to pay attention to, because there's something in there that would adversely affect every living, breathing individual in this country.
Absolutely. A total overhaul of federal government. Dr. Clemens?
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for attending this session this evening. One of the things I want to note is that this is not the first time that we've seen this in American history. And certainly, with the short-lived era of Reconstruction, from roughly about the 1860s into the late 1870s, there was an effort to roll back the gains that had been made in that period. One of the important features of what's taking place is the centralization of power. And it's very interesting to me because in many respects it parallels what occurred during the era of Reconstruction, which ushered in the period of Jim Crow segregation. Centralization of power, with it, federal authority was used to enforce civil rights and to rebuild the South. But at the end of Reconstruction, there was a shift towards allocating more power to the states to allow greater control on behalf of the states. Rollbacks of civil rights, my colleagues have already touched on this, I think, to a large extent. One of the problems with Project 2025 is that it proposes policies that can weaken civil rights protections, and anti-discrimination laws have been mentioned, as well as the dismantlement of affirmative action and the erasure of DEI initiatives. One of the things that I also want to say is that this process has been underway well before the publication of this document. So this really sort of codifies, I would say, or concretizes, if you will, the wishes and desires of the conservative leaders in this country, the so-called conservative leaders in this country, I would say. There will also be economic and social impacts. At the end of Reconstruction, there were significant economic and social setbacks for African Americans in particular. And of course, in our contemporary history, not only have African Americans benefited from the struggles that they have advanced, but many other groups. So the poor, all poor people will suffer, if you will, as a result of Project 2025. Finally, I want to point out that both the contemporary period as well as Reconstruction saw significant resistance and advocacy efforts, if you will, on the part of people like yourselves. And that's what I like to think and hope that we're building from the ground up.
Dr. Newby Alexander and then Delegate Hayes.
Thank you so much. This is what happens when you have two historians on a panel. Just saying. Most people do not understand what words mean. Words have power, and there is a cultural connection to words. There is a connection to what words are supposed to mean. And what we see, and George Orwell warned the world about when you start messing with words, you mess with ideas, you confuse people, and then they simply phase out. They just blot out everything. It creates a dystopian society when you manipulate language. And that's what you see in Project 2025. You see a manipulation of language. One of my pet peeves. Taking the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and saying he was advocating for a colorblind society. He was not. And if you are one of those who has fallen victim to that lie, shame on you. Because you have a thing called a smartphone, a cell phone. Use it. Because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't saying that it was a problem to see color. He was saying when you put value to someone's color and make some people inferior and others superior, that's where the problem is. To judge a person by the content of their character is not saying, I don't see color. And when you say that, then you threaten people who are being discriminated against. And so the whole foundation of the civil rights platform in 2020, in Project 2025, is to create this veneer of a colorblind society so that not a single piece of information is taken down so that you can prove discrimination. If you eliminate people checking off the box of race and gender, you have no evidence that you are being discriminated against. Now, one other thing. People of African descent arrived in Virginia by force in 1619. 245 years later was when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. Between that and now, it's been 60 years. So America has only had 60 years to think about erasing what it did for 245 years. And you know erasure doesn't happen that fast. And so what has America done? It has erased what it did to black people. It erased historically the need for a civil rights movement, the need for a 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. It erased your understanding of how the Dred Scott decision had the Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney, who was a slaveholder, say that there's not a single black person in America that has any rights that a white person should respect. You had a Virginia 1667 law and a 1679 law that basically said that a white person, if felt threatened by a black person, could kill them with impunity. Now, the language of that law is very similar to the Stand Your Ground law. So we don't see people moving away from these civil rights issues. We see people not moving away from the discrimination, from the assumption that black people should be feared. America has not yet confronted its past. It's hidden from it. It has tried to avoid it. And you have to also understand that the very definition of conservatism, I'm going to read it to you. It means averse to change or innovation and holds traditional values.
Well, you know, just like Dr. Clemens said, this hasn't just started. It's always been in the works, and you see it from a historian. It's been in the works from the very beginning. We're going to go to Delegate Hayes and begin.
Before, I just want to read the second part, because that's
I
really
thought you
important.
finished. Go ahead.
Okay? The second part is a person favoring free enterprise, private ownership, and socially traditional ideas. And imagine, when you talk about tradition, what has been the tradition of America for the past 400 years?
Absolutely. And we're going to get to education, and what we just heard is very important, why Project 2025 cannot defund or do what he wants with education. Delegate Hayes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claville. Any and everything about this document is horrific. It ought to wake everybody up because it's not particularly one section that's scary. It's the whole document. I think we all need to also consider the fact that they're not even trying to hide the ball. This arrogance reminds me of a team we once played, Congressman, where the coach, 2 days before the game, said in the paper he didn't care whether or not we knew what plays they were going to run. I want you to stop us. See if you can stop us. That is the attitude that they have. I'm going to put it in writing. I'm going to put it on the internet. It ain't hard to find. And we're going to run this play right at you. If that ain't scary, and the stuff that's in it, I don't know what is. The most egregious part of this, as I look at it from 1,000 feet, the holistic nature of stripping power and suppressing information and expertise from civil servants. The experts, they want in this plan to strip the power from those who are the experts. I just want you all, I don't know if you, with your imaginary YouTube mind, can press rewind to 2020, to that press conference when Dr. Birx, who was the chief medical person for COVID, stood at that press conference when Trump looked over at her and said, all we have to do, Bishop, is just put some sunshine on you and inject some bleach in you, and you're going to be all right. Dr. Birx slid down in her chair and tried to cover her face because she knew better. But yet, that is the type of arrogance that we're up against, because it's not just one department. It's all through here how they want to take the civil servants and just snatch EPA, snatch the EPA away so that folks can just run ramshot with their projects without any checks and balances. So that under examination and testing of nuclear waste and where to dispose it, we know where it's going. In our neighborhood, they want to take away the simulation and modeling that we have advanced with today, with technology and testing this stuff. They want to take that away and put people back underground, humans, in the midst of it. And that list goes on and on. I'm going to save the health care and education for Senator Louise Lucas. I know she's ready, fired up and ready to go. But I just want y'all to agree with me on one statement. We ain't going back. We are not going back.
Take a look at this. I'm going to let Dr. Coons make one quick statement, then we're going to go to you with the health care.
I want to hear from the historians. I'm enjoying it.
Delegate Hayes made a very, very important point having to do with the ratio of expertise and experts. And I wanted to just simply note that I think it was a week or two ago that the Supreme Court rendered a ruling, which tamped down the input of experts in certain cases that would come before the various levels of courts throughout the country. So decisions in those cases will sort of go to the judiciary as opposed to the experts who would feed input into that process. I just wanted to make that point. So it's already begun.
That's right. And we see what decisions are coming down from the judiciary as well. Senator Lucas, Delegate Hayes mentioned health care. You were at the forefront, you and Congressman Scott, at the forefront of health care, not just during COVID, but even before that time with the Affordable Care Act. And what 2025 looks to do is reduce Medicaid funding, eliminate very important programs aimed at health disparities and helping our community. Senator, the programs and the laws and policy that you work so very hard on, you and the Congress, but what outcomes can we expect if if specific outcomes do you anticipate will worsen if this happens?
Well, on two fronts, let me just start by saying I had a long conversation with Dr. Elwood on Saturday. And we talked about education because, I've been on Senate Education and Health ever since I've been in the Senate, 32 years. Education and health is near and dear to my heart because I grew up through massive resistance. And as I talked to Congressman Scott about it, he didn't have the same situation I did because his family was well off enough that they could send him to boarding school. But other students suffered. And that's the reason why I served on Brown versus Board of Education. Every committee in the Senate that I could serve on that would help to promote education in Virginia, all across the Commonwealth. But let me tell you what 2025 would do in terms of education, defunding and dismantling the Department of Education. I'm going to do like Dr. Cassandra Newby-Owens did, not going to Newby. I'm going to read, what's that, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, that's right. I know too. One of the things that concerns me is that this funding and dismantling the Department of Education. You all know the Department of Education was established under President Carter, and I think there have been efforts to try to dismantle the Department of Education ever since 1979. So we're looking at a plan that advocates for dramatically reducing or entirely eliminating the Federal Department of Education, transferring more control to states and localities. The aim is to reduce federal oversight and regulations of education. And what that's going to do is promote more school choice. And of course, that's all about the expanding the voucher program and charter schools and allowing public schools to follow students to private, charter, and religious schools. That could potentially drain resources from traditional public schools. And that's the thing that frightens us more than anything else. And I can tell you, one of the things that the Black Caucus stands in solidarity with is to make sure that we safeguard funding for public schools. But for public schools, a lot of us would not be sitting in this sanctuary this afternoon. So that's a pet peeve of mine. And also, age has a lot to do with your perspective. And I want to tell you that Project 2025 refers to a policy agenda that would privatize potential policy changes that advocate for Social Security. I'm talking about taking and privatizing Social Security. Something that everybody in here who's worked anywhere and paid into Social Security, you're talking about putting that into privatization? Heavens only knows, and from your perspective, Congressman, I know you would know better than most what that means for us. Reducing benefits, some policy proposals under the conservative plan suggest reducing Social Security benefits or raising the retirement age. Some of us too old working right now. Such changes can harm vulnerable populations, seniors who have to depend on Social Security for their livelihood. God only knows, help us all. The administrators, they tend to want to streamline government functions. There might be proposals to reduce the budget for all Social Security programs, or any what we call entitlement programs. This could lead to delays in processing claims, reducing the efficiency and effectiveness of the administration in serving the public. Shifts in eligibility policies could tighten eligibility requirements. And overall, Project 2025 involves these types of reforms that could indeed harm Social Security Administration and every person who is paid into Social Security over the course of their lifetime.
Congressman, if you could just elaborate a little bit on the education piece, especially as it relates to private and charter schools and in relation to public schools.
I think Senator Lucas has talked about the when you fund private schools out of the public money, you've essentially taken money out of the public school system and put it into private schools. So that's what you want to do. If you want to sabotage the public schools, that's how you do it. She mentioned the elimination of the Department of Education. That gives you an idea of what their priority is. But they also want to cut and eliminate Title I funding. Now, Title I funding recognizes the fact that we generally fund education with the real estate tax, which means the wealthy areas can always do better than the low-income areas, and Title I funding is spread out on a formula where poverty is the biggest issue. So those low-income areas get most of the Title I money. That's what they're trying to eliminate, along with eliminating Head Start. They want to ban books and make up history. They want to cut back on the school lunch program, along with cutting back on SNAP benefits. Student loan forgiveness programs, they want to eliminate all of them. So you can't work in a public service position and take advantage of the public service loan forgiveness program, work 10 years as a teacher or something like that, all your loans are forgiven. Or if you pay a percentage of your income for a certain number of years, the rest are forgiven. They want to get rid of all of those programs. They want to get rid of Parent Plus loans and graduate loans. They want to make sure that no undocumented individual gets any help at all. They want to rescind all support for LGBTQ individuals. All the protection they get under present law, they want to get rid of all those. That's their education agenda.
There's a lot. Senator?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Cavell. As you know, in the Senate, education and health goes together, and I think for congressmen at the federal level, yours is education and labor. Education and so with us, we have education and health combined, and one of the other things that I wanted to mention is what they plan to do about reproductive rights. The executive order plans suggest that, of course, reproductive rights, revert back to the states. But the whole plan is to make sure that reproductive rights are not available for women or their families at all. It encourages states to pass their own restrictive reproductive rights with the goal of creating a patchwork of states where reproductive rights is illegal or severely restricted. And as you know, again, being the chair of education and health for 2 cycles, every time Youngkins were to introduce a reproductive rights bill to my committee, it went right straight in the trash can. So one of the things that we need to make sure we do, we're all here now because we want to make sure everybody understands just how important this election is, from the top, for the presidential, all the way down the ballot. From the presidential to the congressman you are, all the congressmen.
Every 2 years.
Exactly. But we need to make sure we get people in place who understand what the adverse impact of these policies will have on the vast majority of Americans. And James is about half my age now. I used to.
He's grown up a little bit.
And so I'm probably not going to be out there doing all the marches with you, but I'll tell you what, I'll be somewhere close by because I don't care how old you are. If you care about your children, your grandchildren, and now I can say great-grandchildren for me.
All right.
You're going to fight this thing with every ounce of energy and breath that you have because it's going to affect all of us, Congressman. You're there.
You mentioned abortion. President Trump is trying to gaslight people as saying everybody was for states' rights. My memory of states' rights was that's what they used to stand in the courthouse, in the schoolhouse door, talk about some states' rights. States' rights was the racist side of civil rights. And he's trying to say that everybody's for states' rights. Wrong. No, we want civil rights for everybody. Also, the EPA was mentioned. Let me just say part of that was the elimination of the Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights Office, along with the EPA. But in health, there's a lot of stuff. The national abortion ban, they're going to try to pull off. But they also want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act improvements we made, where we reduced drug prices. We limited cost of insulin to $35. We limited, and it'll go into effect next year for Medicare, $2,000 a year limit on out-of-pocket expenses on pharmaceuticals. They want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of protections for pre-existing conditions. They want to cut back on eligibility for Medicaid. They want to make it okay to deny access to contraception. And all of that is part of their health care agenda.
Absolutely. Delegate Hayes.
Yeah, I just want to say how important it is for us to continue to remain fortified. Because this is not about a certain issue that we're trying to attack and stop, and then we can go rest on our laurels. It is a continuous fight. There will always be a continuous fight, because as we advance and move forward, other folk want to keep doing their best to revert things back to what it was. So we have to remain fortified and continue in this fight at every level, as Senator Lucas mentioned. Now, this Project 2025 just happens to be a document that's speaking to federal. But let me tell you, Trump and his friends are at every level. If you think starting at this federal level, trying to demolish the Department of Education, what does that mean? In the Virginia General Assembly, we see this stuff being attempted today. I keep on my desk, on the floor, in my office, in my car, on my tablet, everywhere I go, on my phone, a copy of the capitation tax, 1965, City of Chesapeake. My grandmother, Margie Hayes Bowes, thank you, my historian Corey Hayes, my brother. The receipt from my grandmother paying her poll tax. That's not like some foreign, 200, 300 years ago. In Chesapeake, in my lifetime. I'm not going back. I don't know about y'all. We're not going back. All right. And on education is the point that I was getting to. When I was in the second grade, Miss Jacob's class at Portlock Elementary, I've read and learned about then Delegate Bobby Scott.
That was a while ago. I think he had an afro back then.
But we learned about the Virginia Constitution that says that every child in the Commonwealth will be afforded the opportunity to have a free public education. All of this stuff threatens the opportunity for public education when they come in trying to tickle our ears with ideas to give money over here to this private school or charter school, etc. We have to stay focused and just stay fortified, because we know there's going to be some backlash whenever we get these victories. They're coming. And the question is, will we have the courage to stand strong and keep the country moving in a forward direction instead of trying to roll us backwards?
Well, Dr. Corbell and Vernon talking, I just have one question. If they have the gall to put their plan in writing for the world to see,
That's right.
who knows what they're keeping from us?
That's right.
What else is to follow? You all need to think about that one as well. Because if they can put this in writing, I'm scared to death, Bishop, about what's not being said.
Cassandra, I think you had something.
Yes, I did want to say that when you're talking about education, you're talking about potential and opportunities. And when, as a historian, when I'm reading about the hundreds of years that people of African descent wanted one thing for their two things for their children: freedom and education. Those two things are the foundation of the hope, the desire, the determination, and the fuel for the resilience to persevere even in the face of so much hate and so much governmental control. And when I see people not value education and freedom, it troubles me really deeply. You know, this country has been whittling away at our educational priorities for decades. And I would say that for the nation as a whole, it began with integration. For Black people, it started from the time we walked onto this continent. Because education was the one thing that the states and the federal government eventually did not want Black people to have. And what has been under attack time and time and time again in this country in your lifetime? Education. They attack teachers who end up raising people's children, who use the few dollars that they have to provide resources, food, clothing, supplies for their children in the classroom. And what did our Congress do? Not you. What did our Congress do? They eliminated any tax credits that teachers could get, helping the children that they were teaching. How many times have we heard in our society this concept, those who can't teach? And my response is, okay, so that surgeon that you're just about to use that is going to operate on you, I taught them, but somehow I can't be a practitioner of what I'm teaching. So we've demonized it for one reason, because America has become a nation all about money. And I would say that is actually how we start. And so understand that our educational system is in danger because corporate America wants people to be stupid.
Thank you.
Cassandra, I want to stay right there with you because I want to talk about the environment, because many times when we talk about the environment, of course, we know about global warming. Well, hopefully we do. Hopefully we believe it. But we know about these things that are kind of 32,000 feet in the air. However, environmental concerns are really affecting a lot of our communities. So what this Project 2012 looks to do is reduce key environmental protections and enforcement of environmental regulations, prioritizing industrial and corporate interests over the health of people. Governor Scott even mentioned reducing those EPA regulation and protectionisms. How do you see, and others on the panel, these initiatives really hitting home for us in our communities and affecting what we call vulnerable communities?
So the template of racism has not changed in America. And that template really was put in stone by the 20th century. And so with creating red line communities, that guaranteed that you couldn't get loans for your homes. When we had the Homeowners Loan Association Corporation, that guaranteed that black people could not buy property in suburban communities, that they were locked into urban areas in which it was a crumbling situation. And then cities, through their planning commissions, began to move huge, toxic producing businesses either inside or right beside black communities.
Thank you.
But we don't even have to go that far. How about you travel down 264 from the tunnel to the end of Portsmouth? Where do you see a sound barrier? How about nowhere? And those sound barriers not only protect communities from all the sound, but it protects them from the toxic fumes. And we won't even talk about what Portsmouth, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the United States government did to Sugar Hill community. And you know, there is something like 100% a higher rate of cancer from people who live in that community because of the toxic waste that was deposited into that community, into the land, into the water. And so there's a lot that is happening and that exists right now. Project 2025 seeks to not only take that, but supercharge it with no restrictions. And so then you can't even file a lawsuit against the federal government or the state or local government for poisoning your community. Because one of the most dangerous things in the world is when your health and well-being is not important. What is important is whether I can make money. And that's why the whole healthcare system is a problem. Go to a hospital now. From the time you walk in the hospital, they write on the board when you're going to be discharged, regardless of what, I mean, no tests have been done. But they write on the board when you're going to be discharged, and they give you, in some cases, fake conditions to kick you out of the hospital. Why? Because my money as a corporate leader is based how much I can get you in and get you out as cheaply as possible. And that is what the environmental situation is all about with Project 2025.
Brother Boyd, former communities, and then we talk to Delegate Hayes.
Can I say to Dr. Newby-Alexander's point, and if you haven't seen it, Dr. Newby-Alexander made a presentation to City Council earlier this year.
Right.
And she introduced a concept called restorative justice, which is a brilliant term that I hadn't heard before. As a matter of fact, in that theory, what Dr. Newby-Alexander put forward was that this nation owes our community, the black community, the absolute necessity and need to restore from the sins and evil that our families had to endure, specifically in Sugar Hill. And not only just in Sugar Hill, but there's red line communities right now in Southside, right by where those shipyards that are bringing in emissions, that people are inhaling dangerous levels of emissions, whether that be through the air and in the soil. Not only that, lead contamination. We talk about housing resources. When you have pieces of lead that are coming off of these under-resourced communities, where landlords are allowing people to live in inhumane conditions,
Mold and everything.
and these children are picking up lead and digesting that affects your cognitive ability. But also what Dr. Newby-Alexander put forth is even in emissions, and she just mentioned it, Cancer rates are high throughout in the city of Portsmouth. There's a direct correlation between emissions and the medical condition. And notice in most communities, our communities, where they have a lot of emissions, what do they put in those communities? Clinics. That's the first thing that they put in those clinics. And most of them send out surveys. Matter of fact, some of them already sent out some surveys to Southside now, and they ask whether or not you've experienced certain conditions, so that they can survey their neighborhood to see where certain lawsuits may be coming against them from people who have been exposed to dangerous levels of toxins. This stuff is real, and I implore you, if you haven't listened to her presentation that she gave to council about Sugar Hill, and let me say this, and this might be controversial, but the truth is controversial. If council does not restore the sin that was done to those families in Sugar Hill, none of them should return back. Those families in Sugar Hill deserve restorative justice, and they deserve the land that was taken from them on racist and bigoted policies. That's something that they deserve, and I hope, again, implore you, if you haven't listened to the presentation, go back and listen to her presentation for council.
That's right. Thank you. Could I say one more thing? I promise it'll be quick. In Portsmouth, once again, 264 was selected to go straight through every single black community.
Thank you. Thank you.
And specifically destroying the business community within the black community. And so it just sliced through. And you see that happening from city to city to city, wherever there are concentrations of African Americans. That was done intentionally. You cannot 100% of the time create a route like that and it be random. It was not random. It was designed to destroy the economic engines of the black community, separating communities, and then putting these toxic fumes and waste stations right in the middle of black communities. That has not been changed. It exists today, and then people turn around and say, well, I wonder why there's so much crime. Why there's so much dystopia, why there's so much this and that in the communities. Okay, so we know exactly why. The problem is we haven't had a movement to force that change.
Thank you. And we're going to talk about criminal justice in just a moment. So, anyway, but Congressman and then Delegate Hayes.
The question was, what can we do about adverse impacts on vulnerable communities? And the impact of these interstates going through communities and right through Newport News, Jackson, Wharton, Richmond. I'm not sure we can undo the highways, but there was money in the transportation bill that for money for communities to get to see what they could do to make up for that. It's called Reconnecting Communities. And I know most of the communities in this area have applied for that. Some have gotten the money, and we'll see how that, it's not going to correct it, it won't make up for it, but it might make a positive step. Also in the transportation bill, you have some intentionality. We had roads, bridges, tunnels, ports, airports, broadband. The transportation bill also had money to remove lead pipes.
Everything.
I know Chesapeake got some of that money. That has, you're intentionally, I've never seen a transportation bill with lead pipe removal in it. So, I mean, we are taking opportunity when we can, but there's a lot going on. We talked about the elimination of the environmental justice office in Project 2025, moving money, reducing money for SNAP benefits and other safety net programs, in Head Start, private education rather than public education, tax policy. Are you going to have child tax credit so people can go to the grocery store with more money, $300 a month per child per month, or whether, like the Trump tax bill, 80% of the benefits go to the top 1% of corporations. Tax policy is an issue. Project 2025 has an elimination of many of the programs that the Biden administration put in for housing equity. to reduce discrimination and promote equity and home ownership. They want to get rid of all of those. And of course, the idea that you can't file disparate impact cases if 2025 gets its way in education, housing, and employment cases. So there's a lot in this that will make matters worse as far as vulnerable communities.
Absolutely. Dr. Hayes.
Yes, I don't mean to pivot, but there's so much in this thing.
Yeah.
We did have scheduled, Bishop White was to be on this panel. How many ministers are in the house? How many people of faith are in the house? In this plan, and I get sick of this year after year after year after year, decade after decade. Some folks, they want you to believe that they have a monopoly on Christianity. Bishop, my faith teaches me, so to say one of the bishops, we got bishops all over in here, pastors, ministers, and parishioners of all faiths, all types of faiths. But it just bothers me to watch as a Christian them act like we have a monopoly on Christianity and faith. In this plan, they're going to run this play right at you and try to bowl you over with what a few people want to shape and mold what they want to say Christianity is. My faith teaches me, somebody say, Lord have mercy.
Yeah, that's right.
My faith teaches me that to be a Christian is to be Christ-like.
Thank you.
And from what I know, it aligns and parallels with the poet Terence, who wrote in Latin in 159 BC.
You're talking good, Delegate.
Homo sum humani nihil in me alienum puto, which means I am a human being, and there's nothing human that is alien to me. When I see another human, I can connect with their experience. When you smile, my mirror neurons makes me smile. When you cry, my mirror neurons make me sad, and I want to weep with you. When I listen to and watch the actions of some of these folk going at humans, did you hear that list that Congressman Scott and Senator laid out on taking SNAP benefits and Head Start? Don't want you to learn. Want you to just sit there and be lulled to sleep. How dare you be woke?
I say that.
I'm just appalled at this continuous effort to try to confine what a few people believe Christianity to be about.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think I might have done something to my mic. Well, you know, I'm like Delegate Hayes. I don't want to just kind of jump all over the place, but there's so much that we need to cover, and we don't have nearly the amount of time that we need to do it. And so we're going to have a lot more of these forums. We need to, because we need to educate people. But on page 676 of Project 2025, it speaks to one of the other very important agencies that we have, and that is the Office of Atmospheric Research. Oceanic Research. Dr. Newman wants everything points to money. And this is all about downsizing weather information. Congressman, you're at the level where you can speak to that. How are we going to know what we're supposed to do if we don't have some information to the weather?
It's not downsizing, it's privatizing.
Thank
So
you.
that you get your information after you pay somebody who can make a profit on this information. So it's not, now, you know, you get the same information, somebody's gonna make a profit on it. It's privatizing. That's in there.
Also want to drill, make a drill, right?
Can I say something? You know, a lot of people don't realize that Project 2025 came from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation, you need to know about this organization. It is made up of key people who've been in the Republican Party going back to the 1960s and 70s. And they created, yes, it was formed in 1973, but many of these people were part of the Republican infrastructure who did not want to see the end of segregation. They did not want to see the beginnings of civil rights, of voting rights, and so forth. And so they got together with some of your major billionaires, the Coors family, the Waltons, and all these other major heavy-hitting corporate leaders. And they formed the Heritage Foundation. So everything, including this whole initiative to book ban, that came from the Heritage Foundation. So you have to, and they're the ones, by the way, who've been busy selecting Supreme Court justices to be put up. And they have been funding these trial balloon cases to try to destroy, which they have successfully, affirmative action, as well as a whole host of other things, to the point that people don't even understand what affirmative action is or was. They don't understand they don't understand equity, inclusion, and diversity because they're listening to other people redefine it. That's why I said words are important, and understanding definitions are very important. Critical race theory, for example, is one of their buzzwords that they've polluted because it is all about looking at the foundation of American legal system and seeing its trajectory. And I always tell people, if you really want to know how it is, look at what I call the legal Bible, which was written by A. Leon Higginbotham, In the Matter of Law, The Color of Law. And he looked at that and he documented for 4 different states. He documented step by step by step the different court cases and the different laws that put in place racism in this country going back to the 17th century. And so because people don't understand this history, they don't understand who the Heritage Foundation is or the fact that they are really supported by the majority of these billionaires out here.
Absolutely.
They have a very specific agenda, and their agenda is selfish.
And
it is making more money.
And to your point, that's why continuing funding public education is important in protecting the information, the truth. Brother Boy, the truth is uncomfortable if you don't want to hear it. But the truth is right? And if it's right. And when we talk about eliminating diversity and inclusion programs, that's also part of Project 2025, not just in education, but throughout the entire federal government. And it has reverberating effects even in corporate America and outside of corporate America as well. Dr. Clemens, you wanted to chime in.
On education, I wanted to point out that when education is minimized or not properly administered, certainly it undermines and can undermine all of the progress that's been made in the past and future progress. That's really one of the fundamental issues with the attack on education. With respect to Christian nationalism, we all might remember an organization called the Moral Majority, which emerged during the early campaigns of Ronald Reagan. And they used words like majority to reflect. I think it was Delegate Hayes' comments that brought this to mind for me, but it was always to project, that they were a dominant force in American politics, and of course, at that time, they were simply emerging and had not reached the level that I believe that they have reached today with respect to penetration of the governmental enterprise. What Project 2025 does for me overall is seeks to undermine our understanding of what the role of government ought to be, which is to protect its citizens. The role of government is to protect its citizens, and if government is unable to do that, then we don't have a system of public rule.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to point that out. Almost everything in Project 2025 serves to minimize how government will function in the various spheres of our life, in healthcare access, education, criminal justice, the economy, and of course environmental justice. I was really touched by our discussion pertaining to environmental justice because one of the things it seems to me that is problematic for the struggle of people of African descent is our knowledge and understanding of the environmental impacts that have affected our communities. And I was glad to hear the discussion about the highways and how they cut through and split black neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. I'm glad to hear that because many of us have little to no knowledge about the facts that occurred.
Absolutely. There's one other area I want us to touch on. As we mentioned, this covers all the federal government, but more specifically, outside of federal government is the local part. And we're going to talk about what we can do as citizens to stop what we've just talked about in just a moment. But I want to touch on criminal justice. When we look at criminal justice, Project 2025 looks to increase policing and incarceration, reduce funding for community-based alternatives. Now, all of us want safe communities. All of us support our police. But even alternative-based alternatives, this project will eliminate. Also, initiatives aimed at addressing systematic racism, injustice in the justice system, and increasing racial inequalities, which have long been a major concern, within our communities. So when we look at criminal justice, what do we foresee, anyone on the panel, when we take a look at how Project 2025 will affect our efforts to reduce the systematic racism within our communities?
Dr. Cabell, I'd like to start by saying the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus 4 years ago put together what we call the omnibus bill, and we had a bill that with all our criminal justice bills in it. We had a big package of bills, and one in particular that I introduced was to make sure that there was no pretext to stopping a person because you smell marijuana in their vehicle. And every year since I introduced that bill and got it passed, there's been somebody who tried their best
Thank you.
to defeat that bill again. I mean, every year somebody brings it up to try to make sure that bill goes away. But I put in again the 1 gun a month bill. Who in the world did I do okay, Bishop? Who in the world needs more than 1 gun a month? They try to repeal that every time we have a session. Trying to repeal 1 gun a month. Trying to repeal any pretext to stopping a person for the smell of marijuana. Just any number of bills. Driving while black.
Thank you.
Personally, I've been stopped several times. Either I was driving a car that had somebody else's license plate on it because I was a number 3 or now I'm number 1. I know I'm going to get stopped a lot now.
And know what number 1 is.
No, but any number of us, remember when Congressman McEachin used to get stopped? For no reason. I was told one time that I had Chuck Rob's license plate. Just any old thing to stop you. And then, of course, one day, Connie and I were going out to dinner in Chesapeake. We get stopped by 7 police officers, 7 cars. And they couldn't find any reason. I mean, they went through everything they could find. And I guess because he had on that black cowboy hat and I had on a red cowboy hat. Chief of police had to end up writing a second letter of apology. I mean, all of these bills that we introduced in our criminal justice reform package, they treat it like it's nothing every year trying to repeal it. So if you think we're catching, you know what, right now? All right, Congressman, I'm clean today. If you think we're catching it now,
Hold on, Hayes.
that's right. Somebody better hold me down because I'm beginning to get the spirit.
I don't know which one.
But just imagine. Look, let me tell you something. I will be talking until the cows come home to try to make sure people understand what we're facing. Because, like everybody else, I mean, it's more than just a mantra. I ain't going back. I'm too old. I ain't going back. I've lived through some of this stuff twice already. And I'm telling you, I'm so glad that I got reelected and I got 3.5 more years. Look, I'm going to be an old person running again because I'm telling you, we got work to do. I'll quit now because I'm feeling the spirit.
That's all right.
There are a couple of things in the criminal justice area, but one of the things that these people want to do, and it's in there, they want to weaponize the Department of Justice. I mean, you go after enemies. You can read between the lines whether or not they've committed a crime. Just go after them. They're going to do nothing about gun safety. But one of the really sinister things in there is they want to dissolve what are called dissent decrees. These are court orders to require when the Department of Justice comes in and finds that the police department systematically has been denying people their civil rights, they will work with the city and come up with an agreement on what they're going to do to fix it. And then they submit it to the court, and the court orders that makes it a consent decree, orders them to do it. So if they don't do it, it's a violation of a court order.
Thank you.
Okay. They have postured this as if these things have been imposed upon the people. Now, they agreed to it. Of course, it's somewhat coerced because they were being sued by the Justice Department. If they didn't agree to it, it'd go to court and the judge might order them to do worse. But they've agreed to it, and a lot of cities around the country have been subject to these consent decrees and have been required to improve their policing procedures. They want to get rid of those consent decrees. That's in Project 2025.
Absolutely. So listen, we can do this all night. You see the packet that's there, the 900-page in 2 binders. But I think we hit some very important points. We can't do it all, but some very important points to take with us out into back to our homes, back to our communities, back to our jobs, and have these conversations. Open up a text string, open up your social media, and have these conversations with your friends and get the information out, the truth out. But with that, I want us to talk with our elected officials about mobilization, getting out to vote, and what can we do as citizens? You know, what can these individuals that are sitting out here that took out their time, coming from work, coming here, spending 2 hours with us, what can they do now to ensure that this does not take place?
Dr. Clavell, we had a forum at the Lucas Professional Center last night. We had a room packed with people coming up with initiatives that we could give to the community so that they would know how we could help maximize turnout. Now, this is not a year anybody needs to stay on. If you care about anything at all, we need to maximize the vote. We came up with a list of things, and every Tuesday and Thursdays at the Lucas Professional Center, we have phone banking. We give them a list of people to call. Make sure that they check their voter cards or check with the registrar. Make sure that they're still a registered voter. Because you see what Youngkin did. How many people did he purge this year? Remember the number?
I forget that number, but it was in the thousands.
How many? 3,500 so far. Look, don't wait until election day and get to the polls and find out that you've been purged.
That's right.
You need to check to make sure.
And mind you, before he was called out, he swore up and down that Virginia doesn't do that.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that we're asking people to do. Call. Not just call people to tell them to go out to vote. Make sure you're still on the voter rolls. Do that. But then make sure that everybody that you know who's not registered or you think is not registered, you've got to give them some reason to get registered and go to vote. And then you've got to make sure that on it, don't wait until election day. I mean, early voting starts September 20th. Vote that day. And every day thereafter,
Take somebody.
not the same person. I mean, it's going to be open for I didn't mean that the way it came out. You can only vote one time. No, but make sure you get somebody who has not voted to vote early.
And we just need you to understand, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, as Senator Lucas mentioned earlier, the package that we put together. When it came to voting rights, we actually I think it was Delegate Marcia Price that on our side that headed that up. The Voting Rights Act, the Virginia had a slew of bills that were able to pass. And as Senator Lucas mentioned, every year thereafter, these rascals are coming, trying to unravel and undo the fact that here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's never been as easy as it is to vote now.
That's right.
You have 45 days early voting here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You can vote by mail.
And weekend voting. Weekend voting.
You can vote on Sunday, on the weekend. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
That's right.
And guess what? We used to have the awful, egregious Lee Jackson Day as a holiday. And on the Senate side, Senator Lucas put legislation in, and we rallied and got behind it and made sure it got through. That that's no longer a holiday here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But what we did do to replace it is that Election Day is a holiday.
Thank you.
That's why you need us at the table.
That's right. Congressman. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and of course, about voter suppression. And we talked about getting out to vote and so forth. What do you foresee, or how can we, especially on what you're doing on the federal level, what can you give to the constituents here about, once again, fighting voter suppression and getting out to vote?
Well, there's a strong effort to suppress the vote. You get the sense that the Republicans have figured out they can't win a fair election. And so they have to cheat, they have to gerrymander districts, they have to suppress the vote, because if everybody votes and you have fair lines, they're toast. And so, I mean, they used to kind of hide and say, well, we're protecting the integrity of the ballot. They don't even try to hide it anymore. They suppress the vote. And so we need to make sure that people recognize that elections have consequences, and if we want to keep the vote, we got to vote. When they say it's the most important election in history, that's because every election you can go in one or two directions, and they have put in writing the direction we're going to go in if the other side wins. And like we said, this is just what they put in writing. No telling what is unsaid. And so rarely has it been so clear as to what the consequence is of this election. Elections have consequences. This is a consequence. They wrote it out. And, I mean, anybody that's confused just isn't listening. When they tell you what they're going to do,
Believe it.
You gotta believe it.
Senator.
I think Dr. Newman Owens needs to, Alexander, I know we had Owens too. I'm sorry, I apologize. But I think you probably need to respond to this. There are a lot of educators who need to be involved with us. We tried to get them out to these forums because they have a huge impact. I want to know, how can we get more educators involved with us to try to get this word out there? I mean, they have a huge influence.
I think that educators, if it's in a public institution, educators have to sort of go a middle line, but focus on voting. Focus on knowing what your rights are. Focus on knowing what's going on in the world. Our young people are, and generally the population, is just overindulged. We don't pay attention to a lot of things until it's almost too late. And so educators, I think, would be really good if every church in the Commonwealth
Thank you.
began to understand that, and especially the black church. The black church has been the meeting place, the meeting house. It's not about denominations. It's about pulling the African American communities and those who are part of their friends together in one space and educate the people and articulate the needs and the goals and the vision. The Bible says without a vision, the people perish. And what is our vision? What is our vision today? We know what the conservative vision is, but what is our vision? And I think educators can help create a very clear and articulable vision that we have to go down. And perhaps that is, we're not going back. But what is it that's back there? Think about this. Virginia, under Governor Allen's administration, privatized much of our incarceration system. So what do we do with that situation? We made sure that people benefited financially for imprisoning people. That's not new, by the way. There was a thing called right after slavery during Reconstruction, when they arrested black men willy-nilly, threw them in the penal system, and made them build railroads and farm them out to all of these wealthy white farmers who are already wealthy from slavery. And it's a lie to say that slave owners lost all their money. Let me tell you, they did not lose all their money. That's just been a lie perpetuated in our society. But then there's another labor moneymaker, and that was called slavery. And then there was another moneymaker called segregation that discriminated against black people getting fair salaries and wages. In the shipyard, the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth had people working as apprentices for 40 years, training all their supervisors, but kept them as apprentices. So, we've had this kind of system. So use the churches and have the educators, invite them to come and help educate people about the importance of voting, about this history, about what's going on. Have them make sure that everybody brings a young person. Because even when young people act like they don't want to hear, they can't unhear what they hear.
That's true.
And so there's something that can resonate and, more importantly, ask them what they're thinking.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I was just going to follow up with what Dr. Dubé Alexander was saying. How many educators in the house? We all are critical to this process. We need you to help put a shoulder to the wheel to make sure that this plan that is opposite of that plan is something that we can carry out. I like the fact that we need a vision, we need a plan to follow, counter to that plan, and roll it on out. Now, I'm not in favor of taking that arrogant approach that they take and showing the world what the play is. I like for us to get together,
Thank you.
close the door,
Right.
put our plan together,
That's
we
right.
talk about it, and execute. We don't have to tell everybody
That's right.
what our
Thank you.
plan is.
That's it.
And these folks walking around masquerading as being the friends of ours that get appointed and put into a position.
That's when
Gotta
they
let
really.
Somebody say, all skin ain't kin.
Yeah.
So that plan wants to see a situation where somebody can be paraded around as a trophy and say, look, this is what we have an opportunity for folks to benefit from, as opposed to the masses of the people thriving. We want to see the masses of the people thrive. That's what our vision is, our policies reflect. It's that the masses of the people can move forward. The Constitution actually talks about, and people will say, it was all about getting away from the king's rule, is what they say. And now we hear all of this stuff in here about how you want to centralize leadership and have the governed follow just a few folks, as opposed to being checked by the people. The people's consent is a part of that process. As you govern, you have to get the consent of the people.
Thank you.
These truths are evident that all people, all are created equal and endowed not by Trump, but by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That means everybody ought to be able to pursue happiness, not be limited to just a few. And back to Dr. Nube Alexander's point earlier, this whole thing about being a colorblind society. Don't tell me, that you colorblind. That's not telling me that you see my value. I need you to understand who I am. Then give value. Don't say you don't see me. No, I need you to recognize my perspective, respect it, and then make sure its value is lived out.
Absolutely. I want to give one just space, 60 seconds, for other two panelists on the end. First off, with Dr. Clemens, just one point that you want to leave our audience with.
Yeah, I wanted to just respond to what you had brought up in terms of, what we can do to address the concerns here. And I'll mention a few of the things that I've come up with. And certainly doing what we're doing now is critically important. Meeting, discussing, dissecting the plan, etc. And groups like the NAACP already, of course, many of the church organizations and other organizations, they're starting to raise awareness about the potential impacts of this project Political engagement, of course, is essential. That's been mentioned by my distinguished colleagues. Get out to vote, tell your friends to vote, make sure that you do it yourself, and certainly be sure to double check that you are in fact registered, due to the systematic voter suppression efforts that are going on. Community organizing at the grassroots level, I think, is critically important, and it can be very helpful in terms of eliminating harmful policies. So to engage in community organization, joining a community organization and attending various town hall meetings, that's very, very important to show your work there. And the last thing I would mention from my list is legal action. Legal action. I believe that to be one of the outlets for resolving issues having to do with harmful policies and supporting organizations such as the NAACP that support and engage in litigation to protect civil rights and social justice, I think is a fundamental part of what we need to do.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we mentioned grassroots organizing, grassroots advocacy. Nobody does it better than NAACP. President Boyd, last word.
Sure. I want to thank everybody for the panel. I was actually in Dr. Clement's African American and Politics class at ODU. And one of the books that we debated in this class was a book called Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson presented in that book that racism is when one group of people hold a disproportionate share of wealth, power, and resources. And then use those three things to marginalize, exploit, and ultimately eliminate another group of people. And the way that we fight that, not only through what we have talked about through Project 2025, but the way we fight that is we have to get in the game. We have to be registered to vote. And one of the things that the NAACP were focused on is not just having the voter registration conversation in traditional rooms that we know everybody's already registered to vote. We have to go to our community, those are communities that haven't been listened to, that haven't been heard, and get them involved in the political process. One, for them to be registered to vote. I see so many community advocates in the room today. Those individuals who you don't see their name on the billboard, they don't get a lot of attention, but they focus not just on the words, but on the work. And those individuals, we have to support and bring them up because they are the ones that can reach communities right now who have no voice. We know in the city of Portsmouth right now that we have a challenge in our community, not only with gun violence, but in so many ways, education, and so many things we've already listed here today. But the most important thing that we can do is tell them to get back involved in the government. And that's something that we can do to register as many people to vote as we can. I believe right now we have about a little over it might be a little more now, but a little over 5,000 individuals who are not registered to vote in the city. We have an obligation to get to those individuals. So, in
5,000.
I think a little, might be more. But we have an obligation to get to those individuals in certain communities to make sure that they're registered to vote. And make sure that we have as many voting opportunities that we can. And by the way, shameless plug, one of the things that NAACP has been fighting for in our city is to make sure that we have the opportunity to vote on Sunday, right? Not to infringe upon Sunday services, but after you come from Sunday services to be able to go and execute your vote is super important. So any opportunity we can to register, to get involved in the game, register people who have been marginalized is so important in order for us to fight this 2025.
Let's give our panel a hand. As I said, make sure you're registered to vote, stay engaged, educate yourself, and make sure that you know that you have the power, the people, to change policies for the better. President Boyd of the NAACP, Dr. Newby Alexander, Professor at NSU, Congressman Bobby Scott, Senator Louise Lucas, Delegate Cliff Hayes, Dr. Clemens from ODU, and I'm Dr. Claville from NSU. Thank you so much for coming. In the words of Edith Child, we're fired up, ready to go.
All
All right, before everybody leaves, I just want to make sure that you all got the gist of the conversation tonight, and that is to get out and vote. And I need everybody to go home, not only to make sure other people to register to vote, to make sure that your registration is still active and up to date. If you want to get involved, there are two ladies in the back, Nikki and Lauren. They will help you to get involved between now and Election Day. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you who I'm voting for. And that's Kamala Harris. And they can help you do that. So thank you all for coming out, and good night.